On April 21st, 2020, in Denison, Texas, John Palmer woke his wife Katie up at 7:10 a.m. to go for a walk in the neighborhood before the day got started. And what started as a lovely early morning walk soon turned into a nightmare for the Palmer family. While on the walk, John and Katie were hit by a suspected drunk driver in a very large truck. Despite the driver's record and obvious signs of intoxication, police failed to conduct a blood test on the suspect. Was this due to corruption or negligence? I'm Eric Carter Landine,
And I'm Charlie Worrell.
and this is Crime Lines and Consequences. Hey, Charlie, how are you?
Good. How are you? Happy New Year, Eric.
Happy New Year to you. I'm doing well. I feel like I've crawled out of the cave that I dug myself into while I was sick. And then you got sick after that. So
Like immediately after it, you had no voice, so Josh and I recorded. Thank goodness we did, because I couldn't have recorded the next week because I got really sick, and I currently am at the end of a little bit of post-illness tonsillitis. So if I sound a little weird, it's because half my throat is like swollen shut. But other than that, I'm great. I'm doing great.
doing great. Happy 2024.
Yeah, Happy New Year. It's starting off amazing.
Off to a great start. So what else is going on with you?
Not much. Just trying to get back in the groove with podcast stuff. The kids are still out of school. Mine don't go back till Monday. And so it's just so hard to get stuff done with them around.
I understand that. My kid is starting to plan for colleges and getting ready for some trips and stuff. So it's been crazy at my house too, but I think we've had enough of the small talk, right?
Yes, let's get into it.
But before we get into it, let's just remind our listeners that if they do want the small talk, that is available on patreon.com/crime lines and consequences. Or are we on Apple Premium?
We are. If you use Apple, you'll see it in the subscriptions.
Awesome. Well, we're here to tell you, like I said in the beginning of this, about the case of Katie Palmer. This case is super close to my heart. It's something that I am very passionate about. It's a case that I care deeply about. You know, I'm very close with John, Katie's husband. I was lucky enough, I had the honor to be the first podcast to cover this case. And it is outside of my wheelhouse, right? True Consequences is all about New Mexico. This happened in Texas. But when I heard John's story and he was reaching out for help on Twitter, I couldn't say no to him.
When I interviewed John for Crime Lines to cover this story, I mentioned that I had first heard it on your podcast, and he's like, I love Eric. He's the first one to listen to me.
Oh, I love John too.
Yeah.
He's amazing. And we're going to talk to John later this month. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I want to get into this story. Charlie and I wanted to tell it first so that we didn't have to make John go through it again. He does it often, and we're really going to get a chance to talk to him and about some of his advocacy efforts and the things that he's been doing out there to try to make things better for other people, not just for his family. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. Once again, I want to say thank you to John Palmer for trusting us with this story. So I want to start off by having you and the listeners listen to some of the things that John said when I talked to him about Katie. I asked him to tell me a little bit about Katie, about who she was and what she meant to him. And I don't want to try to paraphrase it because what he said was so beautiful, and I feel like we just need to hear from him. So Charlie, if you don't mind, let's pull that clip up.
That's a hard question. It's not hard because speaking about Katie, God, I wouldn't know where to stop. It's hard because having to answer a question like that, just with one simple word in that sentence, you know, who Katie was. It's really hard speaking about her in past tense. She was an amazing person, and it's hard to eulogize your wife. But Katie was intelligent. She was a lover of nature. She was a lover of science. She was kind. She was respectful, compassionate, and caring, beautiful inside and out. She was funny. One thing that I grew to love about her was this laugh. And it's funny because her mom, Rhonda, has the same laugh. By nature, they are very loud. And the laugh was full and it was beautiful. You could definitely hear her before you saw her. Every day, looking back, every day that I got to hear that laugh was a great day. She was my soulmate, and hearing that laugh brought joy to my heart. She was very family centric. She was the daughter of Tony and Rhonda. Tony lived in Oklahoma. We would go up there. He had a lot of land. He had cattle. Katie would go up there, talk with Tony about family, about things going on that he's doing up there on his land, cattle. Every time she spoke to him, he'd get this grin from ear to ear. He absolutely adored her. Anytime there was any weather, any sort of inclement weather or a cell moving in the area, you can rest assured that Katie would be on the phone with her dad and they would talk at length about weather. Anytime that we had a family trip that we went on with Tony, I think they got more fun out of planning the actual trip than going on the trip itself. Katie's mom, Rhonda, I don't think, in fact, I know there wasn't a day that went by that both of them didn't talk. And hard pressed to tell you that 2 days went by that they weren't around each other. Rhonda was Katie's best friend. They did everything together, whether it was go out to eat, go run around, go walking, or just enjoy each other's company. Katie adored her mother. Katie adored our kids, of course, as any mother would. Bella had the same relationship with Katie that Katie had with her mom. And as a father and a husband, seeing 3 generations together all the time was beautiful. As a husband and a father, I'm blessed to have married such a wonderful woman. My son takes after Katie. He's a very caring kid. He loves nature, loves science. He has a big heart like his mom. We both, as far as and everybody else in our family, have a hole in it because of what was taken from us. This community, our family, and our friends have been extremely supportive. And I'm just so thankful for that. Katie was a teacher at Scott Middle School. She taught science. She brought a STEM program into Scott Middle School. She created a robotics club. She took students to robotics competitions in the Metroplex. And for those that are in New Mexico, the Metroplex is what we call the Dallas-Fort Worth area. She loved those kids. She treated those kids as her own. One thing that really stuck out with me when she was teaching, she had a couple boys in her class, played soccer, asked her to come to a game. So she took me and the kids to go see this game. And it was a middle school soccer game. And Eric, it was 45 degrees outside and raining. And I didn't have a kid playing in the game. So that every 5 minutes, I was like, hey, can we go ahead and go? And she said no. She kept on telling me no and said, I've got to be here. These kids asked me to come. They didn't have anybody there that was going to be watching them. And so she said, I've got to be there for them. That's the kind of person Katie was. Katie was a beautiful soul. Katie burned bright. We miss her terribly.
It's just so heartbreaking to hear him talk about her and to know what an impact that she made, not only in John's life, but in the lives of her students and everybody around her. So I didn't feel like I could do that justice. That's why I wanted to pull that clip out. So thank you for playing that. All right, let's talk about what happened on the day that Katie was killed. Like I mentioned earlier, John had woken Katie up at 7:10 a.m. on April 21st of 2020. John told me that Katie was not a morning person. She did not like to get up early, and he would often ask her to go on walks with him, but she usually would say no, or she would just flat out ignore him and stay in bed, which sounds like my spouse, honestly.
It was also, this was early in the pandemic. Katie was a teacher. She was teaching virtually. We all let our morning routines slip when we had long days at home. And I imagine she was just thinking, I do not need to get up because I don't have to get ready to go to work. I can just hop on the computer and start teaching. It probably felt like, pretty tempting to stay in bed for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that, it's just an interesting thing that was the day that she decided to go with him. But like I said, she did decide to join him, and the two left their house at about 7:30 in that morning. The street that the Palmers live on runs east to west, and the Palmers were heading out onto Glenwood Drive, walking towards the west. Katie had been talking excitedly for a few days about these birds that she suspected were nesting around there. They're called killdeer, which is not a bird that I'm familiar with. I imagine that you probably are.
Oh, I looked it up because I have to look everything up. That's who I am. But this is the kind of science teacher she was. She wasn't a science teacher by default. She was a science teacher because she loved science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she really cared about science, and she loved teaching people science and also learning. And so she was talking excitedly to John. She wanted to go see if there were maybe some killdeer in this undeveloped part of their neighborhood. So they walked over there. They had to go off of the road. They noticed that the grass was a little bit wet, which is why they didn't take their normal route, which was through the golf course. So they went that way instead, and there were no birds. So at that moment, they decided to turn back around and start heading back on Glenwood Drive, and they started walking east this time. The last thing that John remembers from this point is Katie looking over at him and saying something to him with a little bit of a smirk. And at that very moment, John and Katie were struck by a Ford F-250. John didn't lose consciousness. He was aware of everything that was going on the entire time. And when I talked to him, he told me the following, quote, "I remember being thrown. I didn't feel the impact, and we did not hear the truck. I'm flying through the air. I hit the ground, rolled. I remember just being on the ground. I remember the smell of grass. I tried to get up. I could only get on my hands and knees. It felt like somebody had a ratchet strap that they were ratcheting around my middle section or upper abdomen, and it was very, very painful. That's when I looked up at Katie. An expert would later tell the district attorney's office that the truck hit us and projected us 70 feet. It hit us so hard it knocked us both out of our shoes. When I looked up and I got down on my hands and knees, I saw Katie had propped herself up on her side, and she was looking in my direction, but she was looking almost past me, and she let out a horrible moan, the kind of moan that you knew there was a lot of pain behind it. I tried to stand up. I could not stand up. I crawled over to my wife. I laid her as best I could on her back. At this point, Corey Foster, the man who hit them, he was a neighbor. He lived on their road. He lives across the street from actually where they went to go look at those birds. So he wasn't that far away. I was quoting and then I just started rambling. So forgive me. I'll go back to quoting. He had yelled, "I couldn't see. I didn't know it was y'all." I grabbed my wife's hand, and another neighbor at that time had come over, and she sat down in the grass by Katie's head, and I was holding Katie's hand, begging her to breathe. She was not breathing. I thought, man, if she could just breathe, everything is going to be fine. She took a deep breath, and for that 5 or 10 seconds, I thought I was going to be okay. She's breathing, and that's when I noticed that she wasn't blinking her eyes, and her eyes were fixed. They were staring straight up at the sky, and she was taking shallow breaths, probably every 10 or 15 seconds. And I reached up as best I could to get her to blink her eyes. Anything, just begging her to stay with us. Just stay with us. I told her how much I loved her. I told her how much we needed her, how much the kids needed her. Everything's going to be fine. I kept telling her this as well as myself. I mean, I couldn't have said it better. I know I tried to paraphrase halfway through that, but like he really paints a very clear picture of what happened and just the emotion behind him trying to get her to react to him. Heartbreaking. So John starts yelling for somebody to call 911. He is just screaming, hoping that somebody will do that. Corey Foster walks up to him and hands him his phone, John's phone, which had been damaged by the truck. John said it was almost like bent in half. So there's just no way that he could have called 911. And also, he's injured. So
why would Corey hand him his phone as though he's going to call 911?
Yeah, and it's obviously not going to work. So I don't know what was going on. I mean, Corey definitely was not in the right mindset, obviously.
Exactly.
But Corey eventually did call 911 himself. And we're going to play a clip for you, listeners. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you will be able to see the actual police lapel camera footage of police speaking with Corey.
Yeah, Corey. Can you tell me what Well, I was leaving the house to go get a couple of guys that were going to have me do some work today, and I was just clearing my windshield. It was real foggy.
Yeah.
And then I had them on high, and I just couldn't see because the glare was so bad.
Yeah.
Which I shouldn't have driven.
Yeah.
I should have waited at the house.
What side of the road were they on that you noticed?
I didn't know. I thought I hit
You
a
didn't even
telephone
see 'em.
pole. I never saw them.
The noise you hear in that clip is the life flight helicopter landing to take Katie to the hospital.
Yeah, I tried to clean up as much of that as I could, but I didn't want to distort the audio either.
I think it's important that we realize he's being interviewed, talking about how he should have stayed home. He couldn't see. He thought he hit a telephone pole while the life flight is trying to get Katie to the hospital.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see, him talking about how he should have stayed home. It's just, this case gets so frustrating the further we go down on it, and I don't want to give too much away. So I'm gonna move forward here because I have a lot of things to say about Corey. I have a lot of things to say about the officers that responded to this, but we'll get into that in a moment. So the paramedics did show up and life flighted Katie to a local hospital. Then they put John on a stretcher and got him into an ambulance as well. At this point, John was asked questions by Officer Tarif Al-Khatib, who was in charge of this investigation. He asked John what happened. John answered his questions and explained the whole thing to Officer Al-Khatib. He was then taken to the ICU at a local hospital. Like I said, Katie was taken in a helicopter to a trauma center in Plano, and Corey was given a ride home by Officer Al-Khatib. We're going to play a couple of clips here.
She on her way? She on her way? Man, I'll give you a ride.
I just need to clear my head.
No, I'll give you a ride, man. Okay. Here's your license and insurance. Yeah, here, I'll give you a ride home. It ain't no problem.
You ain't no problem.
I think it's interesting he's giving him a ride home and not to, let's say, the hospital where he could get checked out or possibly tested for things, or to the police station where he could answer questions after he just hit two people. Well, I think something we should explain is, so this neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks. So of course they were walking in the street, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to face oncoming traffic, which is how they were walking. So that means he was on the wrong side of the road when he hit them. He wasn't even on the right side of the road when he hit them. So he's on the wrong side of the road. He's already admitted he couldn't see. And instead of questioning him more or bringing him to the hospital for any types of testing for substances, they offered to drive him home so that his wife didn't have to come out and get him. They were maybe a quarter mile from his house, not that far.
Yeah, I think that the other thing to think about is this is a residential street, and there's no way that he was driving at a residential speed to be knocking John and Katie 70 feet away from where they were. Like, he wasn't going 25 miles an hour. There's just no way.
Right. He's saying he's trying to clear his windshield. He's driving too fast. He shouldn't be driving at all, let alone driving too fast. This area is not a major thoroughfare. It's kind of a neighborhood at the edge. The houses are pretty far apart. So it just seems like the last place anyone would get hit by a car, because it's just wide open space. And yet here we are.
And here we are. And I don't know if you caught that at the beginning where he said, I just need to clear my head.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. So this next clip that we're going to play for you folks is just an example of how Officer Al-Khatib was disrespectful and unprofessional. He's talking about the fact that John was explaining to him that their kids were home alone, that nobody was there because Katie's now being life flighted to Plano. He's being taken to the hospital locally, and the kids are alone. They don't know what's going on. And this is what Al-Khatib has to say about that.
Consciousness, and he's really out of it. They said he's really out of it and he sounds really confused, but he said that they have 3 kids and that they're home alone, and he thinks that the oldest is 9.
Well, they probably gonna come to the fucking door.
Well, they may not.
I wonder what they want me to do with them.
They probably won't fucking answer the door. Just no empathy.
Their mom is being life flighted away, and that is all the empathy he can muster.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And this is just the start of the things that we see in this case that are frustrating. And there's a lot more that I want John to explain to us, especially about kind of how he was navigating pushing for prosecution and what he's doing now. But as we kind of go through this, listener and viewer, you're gonna get more frustrated if you're not already frustrated.
Yeah, if you think we're like nitpicking parts of this case, just know that this is the only reason we're nitpicking is because we know how bad it is, and it's hard to then not see every little thing along the way that led to how unprofessionally this was handled.
100%. So while John was in the ICU, he received a call. He was told that Katie was going to make it, that she had some internal bleeding, but she was going to pull through. 2 hours later, he received another call, and he was told that Katie was not going to survive. John and Katie's kids, as well as Rhonda, Katie's mom, went to the hospital to say their goodbyes. Katie was an organ donor. She donated her heart, her lungs, her liver, and kidneys, and she saved lives that day, despite the fact of what happened to her, despite that tragic end. John told me that this was Katie's style, that even as she died, she still continued to help people. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit now and go into some of the failures that Katie and John experienced as DPS, or the Department of Public Safety. Also, other states call them state police, highway troopers, whatever you want to call them. In Texas, they're DPS. They fumbled the investigation from the beginning. I want to say that I support law enforcement, and I know that it's an incredibly difficult job. I understand that. But I do not support negligence and corruption. So when I see it, I'm going to call it out. And it may come off like I'm bashing the cops. It's not my intention at all. It's possible that I could be a little bit because I'm very close to John and I care about him and I care about his family. But when you listen and watch to what we're about to play for you, it's going to make your blood boil. I know it made my blood boil. I'm sure it made your blood boil, Charlie.
Absolutely.
How much did you have to drink
Nothing.
last night?
Oh.
I can smell alcohol.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a couple of whiskeys last night, but about 6 o'clock. 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock?
Yeah.
That was the latest you had them?
I mean, I went to bed early.
Okay. So you had how many last yesterday?
I mean, honestly, I don't know.
Well, I'm smelling it pretty strong from your breath today, is why I'm asking how late did you stop? How late did you have to last?
You're 7 o'clock, probably.
7?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you had to guess how many you maybe had, how many would that be?
I mean, over the course of the day, probably 4 or 5.
Okay. Over the entire day yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So when did you say you quit drinking, Corey?
8 or 9 o'clock,
Okay.
I guess. 7? I don't know.
You must have drank a lot last night, though, because it's still going up from there. You're under the limit, but you still have that in your system that many hours later, they said.
Yeah.
So not only does Officer Al-Khatib smell the alcohol on him, but this is, I think, about 50 minutes after the accident, right? I didn't quite hear it, but I think he did mention what his blood alcohol was as he was talking to Corey. But if he didn't, he's going to mention it in the next clip. But do you have anything to say about that clip we just watched? Because it's frustrating for me.
It's frustrating because he's clearly lying. If he still smells like alcohol and it's about 8 a.m, he said he last had a drink at 7 the day before. 13 hours later, you slept, you got up, you're not still smelling like alcohol unless like he drank his aftershave. I don't know. He's not going to still smell like alcohol unless he had a drink either much later than he said, or that morning.
Or a lot more than he said.
He
well.
absolutely. We are going to learn that he definitely had more than he said. 5 whiskey drinks over the course of a day. You're not going to have the blood alcohol level he had at this time. You did hear him say that he was under the limit, but let's go ahead and talk about how under the limit.
And it crept and crept and crept, and then it got to an 06. But I mean, I could smell it when I walked up. You know, I can't believe he was that high. Still today, he's like, man, I quit drinking like at 8 o'clock last night, which I'm not really buying that to be that, you know, at this time of day, but.
So he's talking to his supervisor now about this, explaining that his blood alcohol content was a 0.06, allegedly 8 hours, not 8 hours, but several hours after he had last drank. So it just keeps going.
Yeah, we have another clip. And one of the things that really shocked me here is that he's saying this guy's lying to me. I know he's lying. And so you would assume he's under the legal limit by not a whole lot. He still smells like alcohol. He can't believe it's that high. Clearly the guy's lying. So what would you think the next step would be?
A blood test.
A blood test to find out exactly what his blood alcohol level is.
And but guys were into 06. It feels big kitty man 06. What? You asking for blood? No, we're not going to. That was still from last night.
Hey, we got that list.
You gonna ask for blood? Nah, we're not going to.
So clearly another officer at the scene thought that that is what they should do, and he made the call in that moment not to. So let's kind of talk about this a little bit because we got to talk about breathalyzers. We just do. So 0.08 is the legal limit for driving. So 0.06 definitely sounds high for someone who says he stopped drinking the night before. That's correct. Everybody's body works a bit differently, and we can't account for everything, but it's safe to estimate that blood alcohol goes down 0.015 per hour after you stop drinking. To be at 0.06 13 hours later, he would have been in like drunk, almost blackout range the night before. Not 5 whiskeys over the course of an entire day, for sure. Now, he said he had 4 to 5 drinks over the course of the day before. We're actually talking, this is a pretty big guy, so we're probably talking more like 8 to 10 in a shorter amount of time. But that is only if that 0.06 was accurate. Breathalyzers are estimates. They're designed to be in the field estimates. They're kind of like a field sobriety test. Walking a straight line isn't a perfect test to know if you're drunk or not. Neither is a breathalyzer. The only thing that tests your blood alcohol content is your blood. Controlled studies have shown that breathalyzers can have an up to 50% error. So a 0.06 is close enough to a 0.08 that if you accept this margin of error, which comes from controlled peer-reviewed studies, every officer I can think of, including the one who asked Al-Khatib, would immediately jump to, let's get his blood. Especially since he could smell the alcohol on his breath. And he said he believed he was being lied to. Since this breathalyzer was done an hour after the crash, let's take that 0.015 off of it or add it to that number, and we're at 0.075, which is very nearly the legal limit. There's absolutely no reason not to test his blood. I do not get it.
I just know of the guy. Because his wife worked with Courtney, so.
I don't know if you caught in the last clip, he said his wife worked with Courtney Al-Khatib, Officer Al-Khatib's wife. That's a little bit of a stretch that she just kind of knows her and he kind of knows him. John has done some amazing work and found lots and lots and lots of photos on social media of the two families, the Fosters and the Alcatibs, hanging out, partying together, going on trips together, doing barbecues at the district attorney's house, at the pool. Like, so many different photos and evidence of these two families not just kind of knowing each other, but actively being around each other and socializing.
His driveway's right there where you can see that rock road coming onto the. Dude, he's got a big ass house. Dude.
What's he do?
He sells medical equipment. He just moved out here not too long ago. But right when I come up and I saw it was him, I was like, dude, he's probably drunk.
He said the same thing. He said that. He just said that dude's always drunk.
Hey, what time do you want to put down on the?
Well, see, he was talking about buying it, but he said then they backed out of selling it to him. He was going to buy the whole country club.
What, this guy?
The guy that hit the. Yeah. Dude, you should see his fucking house.
Let me turn it off.
Yeah, he knew that he had recently moved to that area. He knew what Corey did for work. He knew all this stuff, and that seems kind of odd for someone who just knows of him. So obviously when John and also Katie's mother, Rhonda, started kind of looking things up on social media, they're finding pictures of these two men together.
Mm-hmm.
He's offering him a ride home. Rather, he's deciding not to get him blood alcohol tested, even though he admits that he thought he was lying to him. At this point, Corporal Alcatib, in my opinion, when he saw that he was friends with someone involved, he should have turned it over to any of the other investigators on the scene. He was not the only one there. They do not have a shortage of police officers in Texas. He could have turned it over.
Even if they were just casual acquaintances, I think it would still make sense for him to do that, because obviously, in my opinion, it feels like he is giving some preferential treatment to Corey. And when I talked to John about Corey's culpability, he said Corey Foster needs to be held accountable for what he did that day. What Corey Foster did was criminal. It was reckless and obviously negligent. He also said that he's got a 25-year record, Corey does, with the police. And John believes that he's had at least 2 DWIs that were reported anyway. So this guy has a history. It's definitely something that should have shown up whenever they ran his license. It's definitely something that if it were me and I was in that situation, I would say, oh, interesting. Definitely going to give this guy a blood test, because not only do I think he's lying, not only does he smell like alcohol, but now I'm seeing this record here that's showing a pattern. So I just think that all of these things leads me to believe that this is a case of corruption over negligence. But that's my opinion.
So there is this, everyone talks about Occam's razor. It's not the only one we have. We also have Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence. So I have talked to other podcasters about this. Justin from Gen Y's pretty big on the whole. I don't think these were police cover-ups so much as it was police incompetence in these cases where they really fumble it. But in this case, I'm going to say that I agree with you, Eric. Normally, I will say I will pull the Hanlon's razor out. But the truth is that I found another case that Corporal Alcatib handled where he was a competent and thorough investigator, where an 18-year-old woman named Kiana Murray was hit from behind, and the truck was driven by a man named Christopher Brian Miller. Her vehicle was pushed into traffic, and then it was struck by another vehicle, and very sadly, she died in that crash. Tarif Alcatib was one of the investigating officers, and he spent 2 months investigating that case. Miller ended up getting charged with criminally negligent homicide, which in my opinion alone, is what I would think Corey Foster would be charged with, but we can get into that in a little bit. But basically, the investigation showed that Miller was actually watching a video on his cell phone, and he was speeding when he hit Kiana's car. So we know that he can not only investigate a scene, but he can also check cell phone records to see what someone was doing on their cell phone at the time of the crash. So why did he not do that with Corey Foster?
Very troublesome to me, and it's something that I definitely called out on this. why was he not even asked if he was on his phone at the time? That question never came up. His phone was never checked, and the scene was not secured. Officer Al-Khatib did not ask paramedics about the state that Foster was in when he arrived. When they arrived, I apologize. So it's just there's so many things that should have happened that didn't, which is why I agree with you. It's obvious to me that there's some preferential treatment happening here. So Charlie, I
Yeah.
want to talk about your thoughts regarding the handling of this case and the treatment that the family has received.
I do want to play one more clip. I don't think we played this one yet, which just, I mean, I don't know if we could drive it home anymore, but let's go ahead and try.
Yeah, she just whacked her head real good because there's hair and stuff on top of the hood. Yeah, dude, he knocked the shit out of her, dude. Because she was laying over there.
What side of the road were they on? That side? Probably this side.
He said we were going this way on this side of the road, and he just bowed from behind us.
The thoughts I have about the treatment of the family is things you could see in the videos we've already played, and that is how cold the investigation and how he spoke about the children not answering the door, the way he was talking so much about, oh, he almost bought this whole country club. Look at his big house. Oh man, she whacked her head pretty good. Like, it's just, he seemed more interested in talking about Corey Foster's life than he did about what happened or the victims of the crime. And I will say that the alleged crime, I guess I have to say, but I think one thing that's really important to note is that this body cam footage, not all of it was included in the initial report. The stuff that is not from Corporal Al-Khatib, like he turned his over in the report. He did not go and gather the body cam footage from the other responding officers to include it. Palmer family had to fight for that. They had to fight for cell phone records by bringing their own civil case. Everything has been a battle just to get this information. We would know none of this if they were not fighting for it.
The thing that makes me so mad, I mean, all of it makes me mad, but just the way that he's kind of jokingly like, oh yeah, he's always drunk. This guy's always drunk. I thought right away as soon as I saw him, he must have been drunk. Like, that flies in the face of everything that he did from an investigative perspective, along with everything else we've already mentioned. But that part, that really made me mad. And you're right, this information wasn't completely available to the family until recently. And I want to thank John for sharing these clips with us. But you're right. Everything that they've had to do has been nothing but a fight. You know, I know you're probably going to get into some of this, but like the way that the attorney general has talked to this family, the way that they've even handled the grand jury, like, do we want to go into that now?
Yeah, let me just let's go into just quickly because I could talk about this all day, but we don't need to. So they called a grand jury and they presented some of the evidence, and they opted not to indict Corey Foster for anything. John Palmer, as the surviving witness of the scene, did testify in that one. Well, the family then got more records. One, they were able to get the cell phone records when they filed a civil suit and found out that on top of all this, Corey Foster was using his phone at the time of the crime. So he's wiping off a window on the wrong side of the road, almost drunk, if not drunk, and he's dialing up something on a cell phone or talking on a cell phone. They also had a crash reconstruction done that showed that he was speeding. So they bring all of this to the DA, state's attorney, I can't remember what they call it in Texas, said, look, he was speeding, all of this stuff happened, he was trying to clear his windshield, he had the cell phone. Let's present that to a grand jury, because now we've got a bigger picture of criminal negligence. And John's like, all right, so when am I testifying in the second grand jury? And they're like, we don't need you. How do you not need him? Like, how? Well, we don't need you. We're just going to present the new evidence to the grand jury, and then they can decide. So why did not one grand jury just get all of the evidence at once? Why are they splitting it up? So as much as we're saying Al-Khatib, you're probably sick of that name by now. This continued on into the prosecutor's office. They could not get the entire case in front of a grand jury. Now in Texas, criminally negligent homicide is defined as someone who should be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk surrounding their behavior that then leads to a death. So, did he have any justification for getting behind the wheel that morning when he couldn't see driving down the road on his phone, speeding? Absolutely not. He took an unjustified risk. It was a substantial risk. He was driving a large truck when he couldn't see, and it led to the death of someone. So what about Corey Foster isn't meeting that definition? I don't get it. I don't get it.
I don't get it. And it's beyond frustrating. And I know that John is doing everything in his power to make sure that the current district attorney does not get reelected. He's pushing for a different candidate. If you follow the Justice for Katie Palmer page, you'll start to see some of the advocacy work that he's done. He's also gone to the State House of Representatives in Austin and fought for mandatory blood tests for situations like this. Colton's Law is what it's called, and it did pass. So thank you, John, and all the other families that were out there fighting for that. I think that it's a great thing. I think that it should be mandatory if there is suspicion that somebody has been using some kind of substance while driving, especially in a situation like this where somebody has been injured.
People absolutely have a right at the when they're pulled over to refuse a breathalyzer to demand probable cause. There was probable cause here. Al-Khatib didn't even try to argue it. He just said, "Nah, we're not going to do a blood test." It sounds like he was keeping that blood test from being done. It should have been done. And not doing that blood test, the only person that helps is Corey Foster.
That's it. That's
It's
it.
the only person who benefits from it.
It may be saved Tarif some time filling out paperwork, but it doesn't help the family, and it doesn't help Katie, and
Right.
it doesn't help bring justice. But there's always hope. I know that John isn't giving up, his family isn't giving up, and as long as people are willing to share this story, talk about it, get out there. If you want to help John with his efforts, he would love to have you, join that Facebook page, follow him on social media. He's on Twitter, he's on Instagram, he's on TikTok. They're doing everything they can to get that awareness. And so even if it's just a share of this story or of any other stories that have been covered on Katie, it's going to go a long way, because the more people that are aware of this case, the less likely it is that the district attorney is going to be able to continue to ignore it. We have to make it politically unpopular for them to ignore it. So I know that John's doing everything he can to make that happen. Any final thoughts you have, Charlie, before we wrap this up?
I think that our listeners in 2 weeks, when they hear from John and how he has turned this into advocacy, will be very inspiring, because just as one person was able to decide that day not to blood test Corey Foster, that can happen in your state too. Thanks to Colton's Law, it will hopefully not be happening in Texas, but you need to know your state laws and what's happening in your state, and let your representatives know that you support stronger investigations in collisions that result in a death or serious bodily injury.
Yeah. It's frustrating as a family member to see the pain and anguish that just the fight for justice has caused the Palmer family. I know that you and I stand with them, and we hope that our listeners also stand with the Palmer family and all of the families in the cases that we've covered. If you want to be a part of the conversation, join us on social media. You can find out more about us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and message us. Let us know what's going on. Let us know your thoughts about this case. And we look forward to chatting with you next time.